Hi folks, welcome back to another episode of Bad Gas Production. Behind me here is my Mini. I'm going to continue working on getting the Mini ready for the racetrack. Let me walk you through some of the things I'm doing to prepare this thing to get it ready for the road, to make it safe, and to really get it ready for the track. So what do I mean when I say ready for the track, and why am I saying that it's not ready or not maybe safe for the road? Let me explain. I've had this Mini for a few years and I have driven it and it worked great. I decided to take it apart a couple years ago and work with a local shop to upgrade the motor to make it all nice and pretty. Part of that increased the power. I also added a limited slip, thinking that was the right thing to do. And I think that actually accentuated a problem that I always had. This car always has had bad torque steer. And if you look up classic Mini Vtec Kswap forums, there's all kinds of groups on Facebook where people are talking about these cars. And a common problem is that the car torque steers bad, or it has bump steer, and generally isn't as fun to drive as the car they originally drove with the original drivetrain that handled actually pretty decent. So there are ways to fix that, and it all comes down to tuning, fine tuning, and kind of knowing what you're doing. The kits that come for converting these cars don't come with an abundance of information, so you're kind of left to your own vices in finding that out or finding somebody that knows. And I didn't quite know what to do with it, and I got frustrated and I parked the car for a little bit. So now I'm back at it. We're gonna fix this thing up. So one of the first things I learned is that the alignment of the motor in the front frame on a front wheel drive K-swapped Mini is incredibly important. Now they don't talk about this in the installation kit, and I wish they did. I don't know if I can really show this, but basically the transmission right here has a drive shaft or a CV that comes out and goes to that wheel. The angle that it comes out as should be roughly the same as the angle on the other side. Otherwise, it will translate less torque to the wheel on the one that's got an angle. So on my Mini, on this side, the drive shaft is kind of at an angle like that. But on the other side, the drive shaft is directly straight into the wheel. So that's one thing I'm working on, and that requires loosening off all the mounting bolts for the Minitech kit and playing around. And in some cases, I'm using shims and a few other things like boring out holes. And anyway, so I'll work on that. So there's that. And the other thing I found is that this thing was way too heavily sprung. There were two options when ordering the suspension for this car. Spring wise, and this car was ordered with QA1 coilovers, front and back. And basically, Minitech doesn't really give you a lot of information about what their kit is, but I had to find out exactly what type of coil that was, coilover, and then what the spring rates are. So the fronts are an 8-inch shock, and they're 350-pound spring rate. And that's what you have on both corners. In the back, it's a 10-inch spring, and I think it was 170. So I spent some time on the phone with QA1. P.S. Huge shout out to the people at QA1, because honestly, I was about tired of QA1 shocks, and I had a lot of bad things to say, and I now don't. They were super helpful. So first thing they had me do is take a whole bunch of measurements. I had to have that car 4-corner weighted, and with that information and some information about how the shock actually traveled on the car and the placement of it and whatnot, they were able to run a bunch of calculations and tell me that this car was way too heavily sprung. So these 350-pound springs in the front were causing the front of this car to ride really, really rough. In the back of the car, I had the coilovers loosened off almost as much as I could in order to maintain an equal ride height, but that was causing there to be no, what's the right word? No tension, I guess, or pre-tension on the shock. So when I hit a bump, it would lift in the air a little bit, and then the coilover would come loose, and when the car weight came back down on it, it would go bang, make a really loud noise. So that didn't really help either. So the spring rate in the back was also too much. So I ended up ordering different things. QA1 didn't have everything I had or I needed in stock. So they actually recommended looking at some other companies. And Hypercoil is what I ended up with. So let's have a look at that. So I think you can see here the blue springs. Those are the Hypercoil springs. And they definitely are softer. I have a couple different recommendations from QA1. They gave me what I would want this car to have if it was exclusively a track car and what I might want if it was a street car. And it was dramatically different. I'll drop information below in the description with the exact specs that my car had, but they may not line up to your car. So, you know, weight of vehicle is extremely important. I will also provide a review later once I get driving this car. But look at the difference. I'm gonna try. See how the car can actually move now? When I did that before, I couldn't move it with my own weight. So it was definitely pretty high sprung. So in the back, here's the 10-inch coilover, so the 10-inch spring that came in the back, and I'm pretty sure that's a 170. And I actually went to a 112 with the Hypercoils. And I think I was gonna go a little bit heavier than this, but man, I can't get that box open. Hold on. All right, so there's the Hypercoil beside the one from QA1. So I was gonna go with, this is a 112. I was gonna go with something a little heavier, like a 125. But COVID times, you know, they didn't have what I wanted. So I went with this one, which is the next option down. This was sort of the street car recommended weight from QA1 based on their calculations. If that doesn't work, then my next option would be to go up another size. But I think this will actually do. We'll see. And again, I'll give some feedback as I get this thing going. Okay, I realized that I actually didn't document the process here on the front, but it was super easy. First thing I did is I measured from this point to the floor so I knew what it should be for ride height. I did that on both corners. And I came over here. There's only really two things you have to do. So with the shock, I let this top one go. So I just pulled this knot out, or this bolt out. And in the bottom, right here, there's a bolt with a knot on the other side. And I took those off, and this came out. I loosened up the spring hats. So right here on the coilover, I loosened that one and that one. Right up to the top. And then on the bottom, there's a little hat here. I'll show you on the back, it's easier. But you basically push that up and slide it off the shock, and then the spring drops down. Put the new spring on, reassemble. I put some tension on it, and then I put it back in the car. Once I got it in the car, I had to lift the car up and down a few times while I turned these hats just to adjust it to get it back to the same ride height that I had before. And that's basically it. So now we'll go on to the back. So the back I already have jacked up, and I already have the old spring out. So I'm gonna go over there and install the new spring, and then I'll rinse and repeat on the passenger side. All right, well, this should be fun. I decided I didn't feel like taking the whole shock off the car. So I left the top part mounted in, and I screwed the hats just up, just like I did in the front, really. And I was able to push the lower hat or collar or bottom of the spring hat, I think is what it would be. I was able to push that up, and you can see this little crack there where that can slip through the spring. So basically got it all disassembled, and I'm just gonna go ahead and put it all back together. Super easy. There we go. Easy peasy. There's a little rubber thing. Can't really zoom in there, but there's a little rubber thing that rides on the shock piston. I'm just pushing that back down. It just kind of goes in and it sort of keeps this together while you have the shock loose like that. So that's it. Obviously that shock needs some compression put back on it, so I'm going to throw a little down. So I'm just tightening the hat, dropping it back down on top of that spring. For now, I'm just trying to get it to take up a little bit of the slop. It's going to need more adjustment, but that's good enough for now. And then I can go ahead and put all the bits and pieces back together here. So from Minitech, there's just a couple little spacers. So basically these things go on either side of the eyelet, I guess, on the bottom of the shock. And then there's a bolt that goes through the whole thing and holds it to the lower air. Always a little bit of fun there trying to hold all that and get it all back in. There we go. Well, probably would have been nice if I didn't push that all the way through, because now I can't get the nut back on. There we go. Next is the washer. And then the nut. It's a nylock nut. That's that. Job done. So the next thing we're going to do is put the wheel back on here, and then we'll lower the car down and find out where it is ride height wise, and probably we'll end up having to adjust this to put a little more preload. The more preload you put on it, the more it's going to hold the car up in the air. So we'll try to make sure it's even with the front, and then we'll spin this other little one. That one's a lock nut basically. So it just goes down on top, and there's a rubber O-ring that goes between them, kind of cinch them together, and then they can't move. So and then after that, we'll rinse and repeat on the other side. So like I was saying, the plan here, install new softer springs, align the engine. I'll probably end up back at the alignment shop again one more time, little bit of test driving and see how that all works. If all of that is good, there are just a few little things I have left to do. The dash needs to get reinstalled. I need to put an idle air control valve on the motor, because the prior tuner thought it was a great idea to get rid of it. I'm going to put that back just so it idles a little better. And there are a few other little things, and hopefully this thing will be ripping around the racetrack having a great time, or I will be having a great time behind the wheel.
So here we are at the alignment shop. Big shout out to Sully for spending almost an entire Saturday afternoon getting this thing right.
Okay guys, a little update here on the Mini. I'm working in the boot, as they call it in England. So a little bit of work on the fuel system. I've been smelling fuel in this car for a while now, and I didn't really build a lot of this setup here. Somebody else had done this. So basically the fuel pressure gauge is here, and it's an Aeromotive one, and it has basically just one line going up to the car. So there's one line going in, one going up to the car, and the return line comes right off the regulator and goes back into the tank. Well, for some reason, and I didn't do this, somebody used 4AN line, and they converted it from 6 to 4 there and then back to 6 here. And when they did that here, they used kind of a hokey setup. So I've always smelled a little bit of fuel in this car, and it makes a little bit of a smell in the garage. I just want to get rid of it. So basically I just built up this new line. It's a 6AN. We're just going to go from there up here. And basically, last thing, this tank is just the standard tank that comes with a Mini. It's a tiny little thing. And I cut a hole in it up here at one point, and I put an air motive fuel sender, fuel pump, actually, sorry, in this, right in the tank. And that's worked really, really great. It quieted it down. When I first got the car, it had an external air motive one, and it was crazy loud, and I can't stand them. Like I said, just kind of reused the line that they had on it, but now I'm going to replace it, and hopefully that'll get rid of the smell. So that's one of the things I had to do to get this thing ready for the track. You can see the battery in there, so I put a new battery in it this year as well. And I have a piece of wood that's covered in cloth that I'm going to put in here just to tidy some of this up. So that's the work for the boot. So let me get to that. Okay guys, job done. We got a nice little cover in here. I just got to throw a bolt on it and replace this with a new 6AN line. Just kind of tidied things up as much as it's going to get for this year. So boot done. One step closer to the track. All right guys, next up was a new steering wheel, and this car had a locking hub here that brought the wheel up a little closer, and for whatever reason it felt like it had a little play, so removed that. And the old one was a little bit smaller, but the old one was pretty cheap. I think it came off of Amazon, and it bent from driving it, so not a great piece. Just got rid of that and replaced this with a better one. Nice wood wheel. Fits the interior better. Next up here, we're going to throw the dash in and mount the gauge cluster where it needs to be, and just kind of tidy this thing up a bit.
Okay folks, we're going to call this the end of the video. If you enjoyed watching, please comment below, share this with your pals, and give this video a big thumbs up. Hey, and if you've been following the Trans Am, stay tuned until next week. We have a bunch of Trans Am content coming up, along with some fun from a local car show. Until next time, pedal down and keep your hands on the wheel.